In the UK, we have about 200,000 international students, which represents quite a strong economic proposition. And when I'm talking about international students, I'm not talking about EU students. They pay the same fees as home students, so they're not economically as viable as students that come from further afield. At the moment, we've got quite a lot of students from the Middle East, particularly Saudi Arabia, and I believe that's similar in Canada. Yeah. And the other big, large size of our market is the Chinese students. Yeah. And that market is beginning to diminish a little as more universities in the UK are getting involved in delivering courses in China. So ultimately, that market will probably shift. However, there are two main components at the moment. So in both cases, we're looking at cultures that don't necessarily cultivate learner independence. And perhaps when students come, they find this quite a difficult concept to engage in. And some of them may feel, well, I've come here to learn, and you're the person to tell me how to do that. I shouldn't have to think about how I do it myself. But this, coupled with critical thinking, if students are to be successful in the UK academic environment, they need to be able to work independently and to think critically in terms of evaluating the sort of material that they're presented with. I would like to mention as well that these are issues that overlap because of the widening, more eclectic mix of students, home students. These are problems that home students are also facing, to the extent that universities have now started to deliver courses to first-year students in study skills and academic writing skills. So they're facing the same problem. So what then are some of the influences that have impacted on learner independence? Well, one of them that I think is very important is the whole communicative approach, which of course you're all familiar with. That, in the 80s, put the learner very much at the centre of the curriculum. It was a move away from having a body of knowledge that was out there that needed to be transferred to the students, and putting the student in centre place. You also had different movements in psychology. You had the behaviourist approach to psychology, which looked at repetition and learned behaviour, and that was reflected in the language labs of the 60s. And then we moved into the whole idea of cognitive behaviour, and the influence of this in terms of language was that language was something that learners had to identify and understand ideas and concepts and internalise them in some way, and then use them. And then later again, the whole approach to knowledge and meaning took on a different slant, and we have the evolution of constructivism, which I'll come back to this later, but I think it's particularly relevant in relation to construction of meaning and what's happening now in the internet. For example, when students are using Web 2 tools and co-constructing information together. Skills-based learner strategies, that was very much before the 80s. Many of you may be familiar with the book Learning to Learn by Alison Sinclair, which looked particularly at training learners based on the cognitive approach, looked at training learners to actually develop particular skills in order to learn more effectively. And it was felt that these skills could be learned and developed with any particular individual. At the same time, in the 80s, 90s, and there's still ongoing work going on this, was the development of the Common European Framework. And this was an attempt to try and have a framework onto which all languages could be benchmarked. So, for example, if you had a student who was a lower level intermediate in Italian, an A1 level for example, a student who was a lower level intermediate in Spanish would be able to perform the same tasks, communicate to the same level. And this would mean that when individual people moved to work between countries, that there was a standard assessment of language which was transferable across different languages. And in relation to the learners, they were asked to, they had a language passport which stated details of themselves, but as well it gave a level, whatever level they were at the time. They also had a biography which included reflections on their own process of learning, and it might have a diary and comments about the kinds of things that they found useful. And then they also had a portfolio, which was a product of the work that they had produced, which could include things like book reviews, essays, projects that they'd worked on. So again, this is all giving more power to the learner as an individual and encouraging them to take on board the role of being independent and responsible for their own learning. And finally, within the grander context of things, this has been going on in education throughout. When you're educating people in the classroom, you're not just doing it for that particular situation, but to participate in a community and in a society. And by empowering them in the classroom, developing this, fostering this learner independence, it means that as members of society, they will be able to play a more active role. I should just mention at this stage that the slides for this presentation will be put up on the English Central website related to the conference, in case any people don't know that. As will, I believe, slides from the other workshops and that as well. So, where does this lead in terms of learner independence in the classroom? Well, one of the things that interests me and continues to is that learner independence is such an individual thing. And here I'm using the word independence and autonomy synonymously.